This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Right, got a shit ton to talk about in this one, mate. And we will do it all in this awful fucking Scottish accent. Got to make Drew McIntyre proud. No, of course we're not going to do that. And God, I hope Drew McIntyre's not watching right now. He'd be weeping with embarrassment right about now. And if I had any skill whatsoever, I might try an Irish accent just to piss off Finn Balor, but I will spare you all the pain, and we will move on with the show because we actually do have a lot to discuss today. Welcome to the show, new and or returning viewers. You are currently tuned in to the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. This is the exclusive podcast that hosts each week here on YouTube and Rumble. We bring you two shows to talk about the, dare I say, the wacky world of pro wrestling. We got our Monday show where we run down recaps of AEW Rampage, NWA Power, and weekend pay-per-view events and article content. And we've got our Friday shows where we devote those recaps to AEW Dynamite and our continuation of the Retro Review series, featuring NWA World Championship Wrestling and World Class Championship Wrestling. And right now we are following along in the archives of the Peacock Library, beginning with November of '85 for WCW and working our way up. And with World Class, we're starting at the November Library from 1982 and working our way up from that. So far it's been a lot of fun going back and watching those shows, and yes, I know we're only now 2 weeks into this, but, it's nice to go back and relive some childhood memories. So if you are all advocates of historical wrestling content, or you just want to relive some of the glory days with me, come back around and check out the Friday shows, because we'll be discussing those shows in depth. And, of course, referencing article content, we've been taking exclusive looks at my personal article content that I have been writing for the Chairshot. I think we're going on 3 months now I've been writing for them pretty consistently. Starting to put together a relatively lengthy portfolio of content, so I highly encourage you to check out my stuff when you get the time. You can either head on over to www.chairshot.com, click under the opinion tab at the top of the page, and all of my work will be labeled under the name Star. Or just check the description box, and I'll always leave my most recent publication as a quick link. This past Monday, we took a look at the current main roster situation with the women's division, and we talked about whether or not WWE needs to start looking to phase the so-called horsewomen out of the top picture going into 2022, and try focusing on some of those new fresh faces they've been calling up from NXT in the last couple years, because they've sort of been going through some roster rotation, but all the while it feels like everything revolves around the same four chicks all the time up there. And I know Bayley's out with an injury right now, but I'm mainly referring to Charlotte and Becky. We will not be analyzing any article content for the Monday show this week, given the fact that AEW has a pay-per-view on Saturday, and I expect I'll have a pretty lengthy discussion on that for the Monday show. So we will hold off on the article coverage until the following week. And that'll give me some time to come up with another topic in the meantime. Before we get into the show, make sure you guys comment, rate, and subscribe to stay posted for our 2 weekly uploads. Would greatly appreciate all the support going forward as we look to grow this channel and try to reach out to new viewers. Of course, with the contrived YouTube algorithm system, they virtually made it impossible for upstarting channels to make a name for themselves here, but by God, we will not give up. Never give up. I think I learned that from someone famous. Anyway, let's get going on the reporting here. And we will kickstart things by going over this Dynamite show from November 10th, 2021. I guess what we would refer to as the go-home show, although with Rampage being added into the fold now, I don't really know what we would classify as the official go-home show for AEW. Dynamite is the premiere show, but Rampage is always going to be the show that happens before the pay-per-view, so I don't know. Take your pick. And I'll say this real quick before we get into the card for tonight, but it does seem like they've pretty much found their opening formula for these shows as of late. They got the video intro at the jump. They got the opening pyro. You got JR and Excalibur doing the obligatory, it's so-and-so night, and you know what that means, which is actually starting to get latently annoying as a consistent viewer of the program, but I'm not going to harp on that too much. And then they immediately either dive into a match or a segment involving Bryan Danielson or CM Punk. And while I am all for find something that works and stick with it, it does beg a very fair question of how long should you repeat this formula before maybe trying to change things up a bit? I mean, I understand WCW and WWF usually stuck with similar formatting for their opening graphics and everything, but I mean, even they found a way to shake things up every now and then. Just some food for thought. So, our opening match is Bryan Danielson versus Rocky Romero, which they hyped from last Friday's show, I believe. So, Rocky, of course, makes his way out to the ring, and for some reason, he's being accompanied by Orange Cassidy and the Goon Squad. And Excalibur informs us something to the extent of the following. The reason that Rocky and crew are buddy-buddy is that, apparently, Rocky is part of that Chaos faction in New Japan, and Kazuchika Okada wanted to have Cassidy and the Best Friends join Chaos. Or something. Right, because if there is one thing that Chaos desperately needed, what with already having one over-the-top clown in that faction in Toru Yano, why not throw another clown into the group in the form of Orange Cassidy? Kind of would sum up New Japan right now in a nutshell. I guess I should try to at least give them credit for explaining a story, but I mean, if I'm a casual viewer, the only thing I'm thinking to myself is, what in the fuck is Chaos, and why in the world should I care about New Japan Pro Wrestling when I'm watching All Elite Wrestling? To which I respond by saying, well, you shouldn't, because AEW and New Japan don't have a working agreement at the moment, and they should be focusing on their own shit instead of worrying about what other products are doing. Generally, I would say the match was fine. There was one really stupid spot here, and it was the part where Danielson's laying on the outside, and like Cassidy kind of saunters up to him to do the hands in the pocket deal. And honestly, I can't even really blame Cassidy or Danielson for this. I more so blame Rocky. The idea was that while Danielson was distracted watching Cassidy be a dipshit, Rocky was supposed to do a blindside suicide dive to take him out. Only, instead of it being a blindside attack, Rocky's just sort of playing with himself in the ring while Danielson's like peeking over his shoulder using his peripheral vision, probably wondering, dude, you gonna do the fucking dive or not? So that looked bad. But as far as action goes, I mean, everything they did looked good. Probably the weakest match I've seen since Danielson's debut, and that has less to do with the action, but more so just the sheer fact that I don't really care about Rocky Romero all that much. And granted, I wouldn't say Danielson's match with Anthony Bowens from last week was all that special, but at least Bowens is an AEW guy, and he's been a featured part of the program. I don't know. I just didn't get much out of this match. I know Danielson's gimmick right now is I'm just going to be Kurt Angle and have a bunch of really impressive competitive matches on TV, but I don't really see why they needed to bring in a guy like Rocky Romero for that spot. Like, especially if he's not going to be sticking around long term. Like, why not throw a guy like Brian Pillman Jr. or a Daniel Garcia in there? You know, get some of your contracted guys some screen time. Wouldn't that make more sense? So after the break, we had the Inner Circle Pizza come out for a promo with Tony Schiavone, which in the back of my head I'm thinking, you know, just because I've been watching AEW for so long now, I figured, Tony Schiavone in the ring to conduct an interview. So logic dictates someone's either getting jumped or interrupted. And the Faces got about as far as the top of the rampway when America's Top Team jumped them all from behind and started laying waste. Right on cue. And, of course, they're all breaking out the plunder and leaving the Inner Circle for dead around ringside. Eventually, they get Jericho in the ring, and Lambert and his crew gave Jericho a relatively abysmal-looking top rope triple powerbomb combo through a table, at which point I started wondering, you know, maybe putting Dan Lambert in this spot wasn't such a great idea after all. Because, I mean, if he's going to actually get involved and do shit like this at the pay-per-view, casualties may be had at this Full Gear pay-per-view. And, of course, the payoff here is all the heels laughing and mocking the Faces while Lambert puts Jericho in the terrible-looking walls while, you know, screaming about the origination of the Boston Crab and Rocky Johnson and the whole 9 yards. All the while, the only thing I keep thinking in the back of my head is, you know, I do still prefer the Lion Tamer version of the Walls of Jericho over the double-leg Boston Crab version he ended up reverting to. And I always thought the original version looked so much better and more believable. So that's what I took away from this. And there's your heel heat before the pay-per-view. And also a solid reminder as to why no one should ever give Scorpio Sky a live mic. Then we had Britt Baker, Rebel, and Jamie Hayter against Ty Conti, Anna Jay, and the woman that probably should be facing Britt for the AEW Women's title at Full Gear, Thunder Rosa. And remember on Monday's show where I said something to the effect of, if there's a women's match that does not feature Thunder Rosa, Britt Baker, or Serena Deeb, it'll probably suck? Well, this match involved Thunder Rosa and Britt Baker, and it still sucked. So perhaps I spoke too soon. Now, to be fair, I would not necessarily say that Rosa or Britt were at fault for anything bad that happened here. It more so is just the fact that they were completely incapable of covering up for the fact that they're working with 4 extraordinarily green girls, one of whom includes Rebel, who I still think ranks somewhere in the top 5 worst professional wrestling matches of all time when she was working for TNA years ago. Just a lot of sloppiness in this match, and of course it's AEW, so it would be fucking sacrilege if we didn't have a tag or a multi-man match on the show where the referees just kind of stood around and never enforced anything resembling tag rules. And let's get something straight here too, people. Just because we had overly choreographed flurry of offense exchanges from everyone toward the end of the match does not mean the match was any good. Can we clear that up? And Ty ended up tapping out Rebel, which is pretty much just a foregone conclusion she's doing the job at the pay-per-view. So, there you go. Kind of feels like a waste of a Britt Baker title match, but if the idea is eventually it leads to Thunder Rosa winning the strap, cool. I'm all for that. So then we had Jungle Boy versus Anthony Bowens with Max Caster providing the greatest fucking rap pone I think I've ever heard. And I hate rap, but when Caster was freestyling on Jungle Boy's body physique and the fact that he lets his girlfriends hang around with 6 or 7 other dudes in the back, I had a hearty laugh at that. And speaking of Anthony Bowens and the Acclaimed, I guess Tony's jumped back on their bandwagon for the time being. Perhaps nagging and shit talking the boss is all you need to do to get a push in pro wrestling anymore. Well, that is if your boss is a total pushover like Tony Khan is. Match wasn't all that much, but Jungle Boy won by essentially fighting in a 2-on-1 handicap match the entire time, so at least it didn't make him look like a dork. Although, it does beg a huge question as to how Tony Khan went about adding match stipulations like partners and teammates are banned from ringside, but only in particular matches such as the main event. Because we want to have clean fights and we want to prevent interferences, but when it comes to Bowens and Caster, I guess it's fine if Caster goes out there and causes distractions ringside. Anyway, so after Jungle Boy taps out Bowens in the snare trap, outruns Bobby Fish for the post-match attack, which, as soon as he ran down the ramp, the mechanical cogs in the wheels started churning in the brain. Ah, clever. Adam Cole sent out his good friend Bobby Fish to do his dirty work for his crew. And as it turns out, they actually did follow up with this afterwards. But of course, Christian Cage and Luchasaurus ran out to make the save afterwards, and that was pretty much that segment. And this apparently to set up Jungle Boy and Bobby Fish for Rampage, which I expect to be a pretty good match. By the way, Jungle Boy, I saw that close-up. I saw that little bit of face stubble you got going on there. Hey, man. We all got to grow up at some point. I don't think I actually started really growing facial hair until I was 21. Had the ultimate babyface look well through my college years, and boy, I tell ya, a solid beard can really change the perception of a man's look almost instantly. Not kidding about that. They aired another quick promo hype for the Hangman Adam Page Kenny Omega title match of the pay-per-view, which interestingly enough included zero footage of the Halloween fuckfest from 2 weeks ago. So perhaps Tony Khan did learn a valuable lesson after all. You want people to order your pay-per-view to see a world title match. Make sure your featured wrestlers aren't dressed in stupid fucking Halloween outfits cosplaying on television in goofy comedy. No, instead they ran down the history of Omega and Page over the last year with, Page running through all his trials and tribulations and Omega basically saying Page is incapable of winning the big one. And imagine that. They took a program seriously for a change and they sold the world title match effectively. What a novel concept. Almost like it's a formula that works in pro wrestling. So then we had the rather interesting follow-up segment with the Elite and Bobby Fish. And like I mentioned a minute ago, this was all used to set up Fish and Jungle Boy for Friday's show. And I guess Bobby's gimmick now is that he's going to be Adam Cole's bounty hunter for the time being. Hopefully just for long enough until we get Kyle O'Reilly showing up so we can really kickstart an intriguing program for 2022. And if you try and ignore the Beta Bucks' absolutely wretched middle school acting level and just their sheer inability to just be natural and authentic on camera, other than these two idiots, I like where this is going. Adam Cole is still in the hot seat with me as long as he's associated with the Bucks in any way, shape, or form. But, with the possibilities of what could come down the pike once O'Reilly wraps up with WWE at the end of the year, they might be able to get Cole out of this Elite group altogether and get him back to where he actually stood out as a main event attraction instead of being saddled with this group of cartoon idiots. Wardlow killed Chaos's newest faction member, Wheeler Yuta. And if that's not a giant middle finger to Gato in New Japan, I don't know what is. And if their objective here was to start that slow, methodical babyface turn for Wardlow by having him go out there and smash dudes in short order, congratulations, this is a good start. If this was just a TV filler to remind us that Wardlow is still under contract, well, maybe you should do more stuff like this with him every week. How about that? But of course, they couldn't quit while they were ahead. The best friends out there. Because after the bell, we get Matt Hardy and his posse jumping the faces. And somewhere in here, Hardy dropped Cassidy with one of the fakest, worst looking twist of fates I think I've ever seen in my life. Because Cassidy had his head wrapped in the chair. Because there's really no feasible way to pull this off without literally breaking the man's fucking neck. But, of course, they tried it anyway because they're morons. And it looked just as bad as I anticipated it would. And no amounts of shaky cameras were sufficient enough to hide it. And, well, apparently Hardy and Cassidy are going to wrestle a match on Rampage. Because this feud is still going on. Because they're still trying to find a reason to justify why they signed Matt Hardy to a long-term contract. Sucks. They aired some footage of CM Punk and Eddie Kingston getting into a shouting match in the parking lot, which included a pull-apart from a relatively far distance, too. And yes, once again, they made sure that they threw in Ruby Soho to be part of the pull-apart crew. I guess the 6'2", 245-pound man in Eddie Kingston was completely incapable here of barreling over the 5'2", 115 female Ruby. She must have muscles and abs of steel to be able to restrain this alpha male, but we'll ignore that. Anyway, we are here. The long-awaited debut of Lio Rush in AEW. Well, ring debut, that is. And he is teaming with Dante Martin here to take on Matt Sydal and Lee Moriarty. But I think the real question we're asking here is, how long do we give it before Lio retires for another 6 weeks and then shows back up in WWE 2 months from now? No, I don't know about the WWE thing, but I definitely would not put it past Lio at this point to do his first TV job and decide, nah, man, this ain't for me. All joking aside, though, this actually ended up turning into a hell of a TV match. And, while I wouldn't say I was a particular fan of everything they did here, I will credit these 4 guys for being able to take a crowd that was relatively lukewarm going in and managed to get them all invested by the end. Watching Dante Martin in his hover boots practically defy gravity never ceases to amaze me. Especially that little spring flip he does off the ropes where he does like the full body rotation and lands on his feet. Like, I can watch guys do corkscrew 630 splashes at this point and just sort of shrug it off like it's nothing. But Dante Martin, man, he's someone you can just never take your eyes off of. I especially like watching some of that back and forth stuff he did with Moriarty early on, where they were just sort of trading quick falls and various counters on the mat. And, I thought Lio looked pretty good in here, too. It's funny because, I remember watching Lio in NXT a couple years back and almost having similar thoughts along the lines of what I just mentioned about Dante Martin here, where, he does a lot of quirky-looking stuff, but most of it usually looks good, and it doesn't ever really look goofy in any way. I was never a particular fan of the springboard stunner thing he did, but most of the time he at least pulled it off. And I always like watching him do the duck and dodge deal with some of the bigger guys where he fake him out running one direction and then he would shift in a completely other direction. Good stuff. And of course they made the right call here with having Dante get the pin, which is what needed to happen. And I don't know if the plan going in was to present Lio as a babyface, but he ended up turning into one by the end. In a weird way, I almost kind of wish they would have saved this for the opener on Rampage or something. It's so bizarre. I thoroughly enjoyed the match, and I didn't really have much of an expectation going in. I still don't really know how I feel about the storyline they've been running with these four guys, but as a match, I liked it. Very spotty at times, yes, but it wasn't like no sell, kick out at 15,000 finisher beta bucks level of ridiculousness or anything. Like I said, I feel like they did these guys a disservice by burying this in the middle of the show instead of using it as a curtain jerker for Rampage on Friday. So that's kind of how I see it. Our main event match for the night, and probably looking back at it, will be one of the more underappreciated matches of the year. Dax Harwood versus Pac. And aside from the absolutely dreadful finish, which completely and totally ruined this from being one of my favorite TV matches of the year for AEW, everything that preceded the finish was fantastic. Although, going back to what I joked about earlier with the whole teammates being banned from ringside to prevent interference, can anyone explain to me why Tully was still allowed out there? Anyone? Discounting that, I again will reiterate every great thing I've ever said about Pac on this show. Very underrated, completely underutilized, can have a great match with just about everyone and anyone, and a guy that if I were running a wrestling promotion would easily be one of my top heels in the main event scene. And I'm not joking about that. I mean, and of course, FTR, I don't really need to elaborate much more on that. They did a lot of chain wrestling early on, which looked great. There was a spot at some point where I think Pac did a series of chops and legitimately opened up Dax's chest. Because I noticed right before they cut to the commercial, Pac did a dive to Dax on the outside, and it was just like this giant pool of blood on the mat next to them. And at first I thought, oh my god, did Pac land on his head and bust himself open? They came back from break, and I saw no juice from either guy's head. But when I look closer, I just see this giant red streak coming down Dax's chest, and that's when it set in. Pac actually opened up Dax hard way with straight chops. Don't fuck with Pac, everyone. And for the love of God, do not put Bryan Danielson in a match with him anytime soon. Anyway, so they're going back and forth for a while. Pac did another one of those top rope brainbuster suplex, which I always cringe at, but it never looks reckless when he does it. I think Dax did a top rope backdrop to Pac at one point, which again looked very safe and well done. And like I've said this before, like I'm not opposed to the high risk offense, but if you're gonna do it, for the love of God, protect yourself and your dance partner. What else happened here? Well, we did get the shitty finish, which I guess I'm gonna have to talk about at some point. So Pac gives Dax the backslide for a near fall, and he immediately grabs a hold of the arm to lock him in the brutalizer. And the bell immediately rings once Pac locks in the hold, to which my first thought was, did Tully just ring the bell? Well, as it turns out, that's not what happened. What we're told is that Dax tapped out, which, after I went back and rewatched it again, yes, we did see Dax tap, but it was after the bell had already rung. So are we supposed to believe he verbally submitted before physically tapping? Okay, and if so, that brings up another question. Why the fuck did Pac win this match if Dax is the one wrestling at the pay-per-view? Because the announcers are sitting there and talking about how like Dax wants to go in and avoid further injury because it's a big title match, and that's why he instantly gave up in the submission. Okay, but that still doesn't answer my initial question. As far as I know right now, Pac is not in the title match on Saturday. If they were doing a six-man or something, I could at least defend the finish because like Pac would be involved with the match in some capacity. But he's not even booked for Full Gear. In fact, he's currently been occupied with Malachi Black, Andrade El Idolo, and Cody Rhodes in the last couple weeks. All of whom are not booked for Full Gear, by the way. But of course, they do an afterbirth here with the whole goddamn United States Army running out at the end. You got FTR in there, you got Tully in there, you had the Lucha Bros in there, you had Malachi and Andrade in there. Cody Rhodes ends up running through the crowd. Of course, that fucking asshat needs to make the grand entrance, unlike everyone else who just runs through the tunnel. Like, seriously, how many guys do we have in this post-match beatdown? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys? Overkill much? And again, it'd be one thing if all these guys were booked for the pay-per-view in some manner, but half the guys in this run-in have nothing to do with Full Gear on Saturday. Couldn't this have waited until next week? Sucks for that shitty finish, man, because I was really enjoying that match up until the final bell. But man, they killed the match dead with that trashy finish. And they aired a quick hype promo for the MJF Darby Allin pay-per-view match. And somewhere in this video, they went a little more in depth on the supposed 4 pillars of AEW. The list of names which include, according to them, MJF, Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, and Jungle Boy. And now I understand where the meme all egg white wrestling comes into effect. 4 guys, 3 of whom can't cut a promo worth of shit, most of whom wrestle pretty much the exact same style, and only one of whom actually exudes anything resembling natural charisma and or superstar potential. That's the foundation, huh? Those are the ones we can expect to be future world champions down the road? Aside from MJF, man, I don't buy it. And, the thing is, I don't have anything against Darby, Guevara, or Jungle Boy. I'm actually a pretty big fan of Jungle Boy, and I definitely understand the appeal of guys like Guevara and Darby. But you're telling me that these guys are the ones that are going to get priority as world champions over guys like Powerhouse Hobbs or Ricky Starks or even guys like Wardlow down the road? Some doesn't add up there. Aside from that, I am still looking forward to the match. I definitely think MJF needs to win, although I highly doubt he will. Hopefully they don't get too cute with it. And that brings us to the main event segment here with this contract signing between Hangman Adam Page and Kenny Omega. And while the idea of contract signings in professional wrestling are just laughable at this stage in the game, they actually ended up playing this one relatively safe in terms of layout. And again, much like the video package from earlier on in the night, they kept it serious and simple. Both guys talked about the story over the last year. Omega talked about how Page let his insecurities be his ultimate downfall. Says he and the Elite pulled him out of the mud over and over again, and all Page did was keep falling back down. Page started running down the fact that, Omega could never live up to his former tag partner. Never actually outright mentioned the man, although the only name that came to mind off the top of my head was Kota Ibushi. And I have no idea how he factors into this equation, but whatever. They talked about the World Title Eliminator tournament last year, and Page basically said after Omega beat him, he knelt down to him and said, "Good job, Hanger. I'm proud of you." And the reason he did that was that Omega realized that he was scared of Page and realized he was a threat to him. And they kept going back and forth a while longer. Omega eventually tells Page he wants to shake his hand and have a great professional wrestling match at the pay-per-view. And right at that point, as soon as Page shook Omega's hand, they totally lost me. This is supposed to be a blood feud. This is supposed to be 2 guys that have a year's worth of unsettled history and can't stand each other. Why is Page shaking hands with this man? Page should not be exchanging in mutual competition agreement with a guy like Omega at this point. A year ago, sure. But after all the crap he's been through with the constant belittlement, the doubting, the heel shenanigans from Omega, Absolutely not. Like, unless this was designed to be a fake out where they both go to shake hands and Page holds onto the grip and then decks Omega with a stiff elbow or slams him through a table or something, all this did was make Page look like an idiot. You know, especially with what happened at the end here with Don Callis clocking Page in the head with the camera outfit or with the camera and then revealing himself under the outfit. And that actually has been a lingering question that I've been putting off for a while now. Like, why all of a sudden has Don Callis disappeared? Well, he showed up here, and no soon enough to make Page look like a total dork going into the pay-per-view. And of course, they go off air with Omega wiping Page's blood all over the contract and that whole deal. So, you know, good segment up until the end there, but I didn't like the presentation of Page. His promo was good, but the handshake deal and him getting laid out like an idiot at the end, not a fan of that. You know, and especially when Page should know and expect better from a guy like Kenny Omega at this point. I mean, Christ, they fucking teamed together for a year, didn't they? Kind of an overlook on their part. So that was Dynamite. And, you know, now that I think about it, I guess now would probably be a good time to run down the pay-per-view card. Because our next show isn't until Monday, and by that point, Rampage and the pay-per-view have already happened. And that is going to be a strange dilemma I have to figure out going forward with the weekend AEW hosts their pay-per-view events. Like, do I skip over Rampage entirely and just talk about the pay-per-view? Or, like, do I include Rampage in the mix as if I'm recapping it prior to having watched the pay-per-view? I don't really know about that one. I'll probably make that decision for Monday's show. Because honestly, like, it's probably not even worth talking about Rampage at that point, right? Maybe I'll pick out some of the highlights of the show instead of treating it as a full recap show from top to bottom. I don't know. We'll see. Anyhow. Oh, shit. Guess I should do pay-per-view predictions then, right? Guess now would be the proper time to do it. Well, it's now or never. Alright, let's pull up the card here. Guess I'll use Wikipedia. Why not? Oh, man. They got cool graphics for this show. I will at least give them that. Here's Wikipedia. So, on this show, we have... I guess I'll just go from top to bottom here instead of trying to format it in any particular card structure. We have a buy-in match with Nyla Rose and Jamie Hayter taking on Thunder Rosa and Hikaru Shida, which I will not be watching, and I could honestly care less about, despite the fact that it involves Thunder Rosa. Although if I have to predict a winning team here, I will pick Shida and Rosa. For the main card, we have Kenny Omega versus Adam Page for the AEW World title, which seems pretty predictable at this point based on story direction. My gut instincts tell me that Page is winning the belt. Although, the Bryan Danielson thing really does throw me for a loop right now. Yeah, I'm stumped on that one. Like I said, I get the argument of it's Page's time, Kenny's ready to drop the strap, it's the right place and moment to do it. I can totally make a case for that. But I can also make a case that there's more mileage to be had out of the rematch with Omega and Danielson for the title, with Danielson ultimately winning the belt. Because think about it. At some point, you gotta start asking valid questions like, what was the point of bringing in guys like Bryan Danielson and or CM Punk if they're never going to either A, be a world champion or compete in those title matches? Because I presume the Omega-Danielson rematch is something they want to build at some point. And if it's not going to be for the world title, and or some kind of big payoff of seeing Omega get pinned or submitted for the first time since, whenever the last time he did a job was. When was it? Like over the summer when he lost the Impact title to Christian? Like at that point, what's the point? So, yeah, that one's up in the air. In fact, I actually wrote an entire article on sort of what I believe is one of the more underground stories and feuds of AEW going into next year that no one is really discussing. And I think if they actually ran with it, it could draw them a lot of heat and a lot of money. And that's the whole idea of Cody Rhodes turning heel on Adam Page, fucking him out of the world title, and then having them basically spend the entire year building around that program. Especially if the truth behind everything Cody's doing right now, like what with masquerading around as this artificial babyface, when the reality is he's more than likely trolling the fans and waiting for the opportune time to strike in order to stick it to them. I can't think of a better way to do that than to have him screw Page out of the world title in the main event of the show. And let's say Danielson wins the title from Omega and they decide they want to do a short title reign with him dropping the strap to MJF or something at the beginning of next year. And then, like, you spend the next 8 or so months booking MJF as a long-term heel champion. You keep Cody and Page invested in that program. And then you build up the, say, Full Gear next November with Page beating MJF for the strap. I mean, it's all hypothetical, and I don't know if they would be able to get another 12 months of mileage out of building up Page to ultimately win the world title, but it's just something to think about. And because they do kind of play hand in hand with one another, I guess this would be a good time to talk about the Miro and Danielson Eliminator Tournament final match. Long story short here, if Page is winning in the main event, I presume Miro wins in the finals here. And if Omega is winning in the main event, I would presume Danielson goes over here. Either way, I won't oppose it. Miro has been a total breath of fresh air on this show. Oh, God. There's a part of me that is honestly advocating for him to be the world champion at some point next year, just because of how great he's been and how much of a role he's been on. And again, it's honestly why I think it was a big mistake for them to take the TNT title off of him. Because Sammy Guevara ain't doing jack shit with that belt right now. Let's be honest. Britt Baker and Ty Conti for the women's title kind of seems like a foregone conclusion. Conti's not winning the belt. The question is whether or not the match will be any good. And I don't have high hopes. I'm sorry. People are going to throw it at me. Well, Ty Conti's improving, that whole deal. All right, whatever. I've watched enough AEW women's matches. Inner Circle top team, the 10-man Minneapolis street fight, probably will just be about as much of a clusterfuck as you're probably expecting it to be. If it ends with Dan Lambert going through the table and doing the job, I'll be satisfied. That, and if we get through the match without anyone getting hurt or dying. Lucha Bros FTR tag title match will definitely be interesting in the sense that I actually want to see if FTR can get a watchable tag match out of Pentagon and Phoenix for a change. And by that, I mean a tag match where the Lucha Bros actually bother to work some semblance of an actual tag match with tag rules being enforced, which implies they'll have a competent referee calling the match, although I highly doubt it. I don't see FTR winning the belts, although I'd like for them to, but based on the way they've gone about building up the story and the fact that they just had Penta and Phoenix win the belts at the last pay-per-view, I don't see them dropping the straps this soon. And that's kind of unfortunate because FTR would make for much better champions. And if you actually think about it, they've been used on AEW programming a lot more effectively than the Lucha Bros have. Darby Allin versus MJF should be good if they keep it simple and don't try to overcomplicate it with run-ins and crash TV garbage. MJF desperately needs a pay-per-view win at this point, but again, with the story they've been running with and with the fact, for whatever reason, Tony Khan seems to have a hard-on for Darby on this show, I could see Darby going over clean too. If Darby is going to go over and they are going to go with the whole Wardlow face turn they've been teasing, this would probably be the ideal match to do it. Or at least, do some kind of big angle that leads into Dynamite where they don't go all in with the babyface turn, but to take a bigger leap in that direction. I guess we'll see. Because you don't want to force it. I mean, I wouldn't say that Wardlow is quite getting over as a babyface yet. I think they need to put him in more squash matches for that to happen. So they don't want to rush it, and I get that. CM Punk and Eddie Kingston is easily the match I'm looking forward to the most on this show. It's definitely had the best build and probably featured one of AEW's best TV segments of the entire year, hands down. Easily the best promo exchange. If you watched the last couple podcast shows I've done, I have been advocating for them to do all they can to make this a long-term program that leads into next year. I think these guys are talented enough to be able to make a 3 to 5 month blood feud work, if they really wanted to. And if AEW is looking for a means to make some bank, and they want to drive in some casual viewers, this is the perfect feud and the perfect two guys to do it with. A lot of people are going back and forth, is it the right time for Punk to do it? His first job? Should Eddie Kingston go over, or should they protect him? I'm telling you, if I were booking this, I would do a no contest or double disqualification finish. The ref loses complete control and just throws the match out entirely. It probably won't go over well with the AEW audience and their proclivity for immediate gratification finishes, but that's how I would structure this if I were in charge. But, with the way AEW books, this will probably be a one-and-done match where Punk goes over clean, they shake hands afterwards, and they both go on their merry ways where Eddie falters back in the mid-card and CM Punk awaits his next challenger of the month. So you take your pick. The six-man tag with the Elite versus the Jurassic Express and Christian Cage kind of falls along the same lines as the street fight. I'm expecting a giant schmoz / spot fest, probably with more indie-looking garbage considering the Bucks are in there. I expect 1,500 false finishes and counters and kickouts. I expect no selling. I expect completely futile, dangerous-looking dives, and provided nobody dies here, I would expect Adam Cole to get the win for his team and showcase another prime example of just because you are a guy from WWE and AEW got a hold of you does not necessarily mean that you're an added bonus to the program. And oh shit. Oh, apparently they did add this match to the show. Who'da thunk it? Are we sure this is legit? This isn't a wiki troll? Because it says here Malachi Black and Andrade El Idolo versus Pac and Cody Rhodes. I mean, it makes sense with what they've been building towards, but I don't remember them announcing it on the card rundown. Hold on. Let me fact check this. I don't want to sit here like a jackass and preview something that's not actually happening at the pay-per-view. Let me try Final Card AEW Full Gear. Because that's the other problem too. Like a lot of these sites either have like card projections from 2 weeks ago or 2 days ago, but I want to make sure I get the final card here. Okay, here we go. This is from What Culture? They're a little AEW biased, but I mean, pretty reliable source when it comes to news coverage. Yep, sure as shit. Here it is. Cody Rhodes and Pac versus Andrade El Idolo and Malachi Black. That is indeed a thing that will be happening now. Huh. That is a tough one. Let's see, do you put over the two relatively new heels that probably could use the pay-per-view rub right now? Or do you go with #LOL Cody wins? My troll response is Cody pins Malachi clean for a second time around, but I also see Pac being the guy to take the fall here, probably with Black getting the win for his team, but yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know. I probably would have just gone with Pac and Malachi in a singles match, but I guess Cody's got to get his pay-per-view spot somehow, some way. It should be an interesting match, though. But I would definitely say Black and Andrade need to go over. Probably ideally with Cody doing the job, but at least you got to put over Malachi and Andrade. I think it's absolutely essential for story advancement. Anyway, so there you have it. That is my preview prediction forecast for AEW's Full Gear show. Despite how it may sound, I am genuinely looking forward to this show tomorrow. The card looks very strong. I think there are a lot of possibilities that could stem from the aftermath. It's probably one of the more stacked AEW cards I can recall in recent memory. Also nice to see there are no exploding pyro ring matches. That is a plus. So we'll see what they deliver, but I'm cautiously optimistic going in. All right. Let's get into some of the retro series discussions here. And we will be continuing with NWA World Championship Wrestling. This is from November 9th, 1985, not 2021, as my notes read here. That was my bad. This is the November 9th, 85 edition. And I'll tell you, man, something that never gets any easier looking at is that cover picture they have on the Peacock Library with Magnum TA and Dusty Rhodes standing at the interview booth just swagging like two badasses. Kind of reminds you of, A, just how quickly time passes, and B, how old it makes you feel watching all of your favorite legends grow up, approaching the final years of their life on this planet, and just the sad fact that we're never going to get stars like this in the business ever again. Treasure the ones that are still around, because we all know they won't be around forever. And yes, I know Magnum TA is still alive, but man, with the way his career tragically ended, just makes you think, what else could that guy have done when he was still in the prime of his career? They aired a quick pre-tape at the beginning with superstar Billy Graham getting into a shouting match with the Weasel Paul Jones, which ended up being a teaser for something that occurred later on in the program. And looking back, discounting the Dusty promo later on may have been my favorite thing on this show. So after the opening package, we get Ole and Arn Anderson coming out to the interview booth. And Arn is sporting the NWA television title, even though he is not technically the champion. And that is when Tony announces that the title is being held up in a tournament to crown a new champion. And I'll say from the jump here, too, another thing that became very apparent about NWA during this time, there were a shit ton of belts on this show. What do we have? We have the world's heavyweight title, the United States heavyweight title, you have the national heavyweight title, the television title, you have the national tag team championships, we have the world tag team championships. Ivan, Nikita, and Khrushchev carried around the six-man title, which was essentially just a giant trophy. Am I missing one? Didn't they say something about the Mid-Atlantic heavyweight title being up for grabs at the Starrcade show too? Good God. And we complain about WWE having too many goddamn titles. Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez, and Vernon Deaton had the opening match on the show, with poor old Teddy Long and his receding hairline calling the match. Watching the match, I was actually reminded of something I used to read about people hating on David Crockett as a commentator in the NWA. I remember reading a ton of forums and articles back in the day with people talking about how Dave was one of the worst professional wrestling commentators of all time, and all these completely radical, absurd claims. And I'll concede, like, I never thought David Crockett was a mastermind of wrestling commentary, but to say he's even in the same ballpark as some of the worst wrestling commentators of all time, that's a bit of a stretch, man. I mean, I'd make the argument Tony Schiavone was worse on Nitro than David Crockett was here, especially during the dying days when he totally phoned it in and just completely gave up trying. But, like, Christ almighty, in today's wrestling world, with all the garbage ring commentators we have in the business now, David Crockett is fucking Bob Caudle or Gordon Sully compared to these numbskulls calling ring action today. Sorry, Jim Ross fans. Anyway, what were we talking about here? Sorry, I kind of went on my soapbox for a minute there. Oh yeah, that's right. Manny Fernandez versus Vernon Deaton. Manny won. That's all I wrote down about it. After that, we had Terry Taylor come out for an interview. Current national heavyweight champion, by the way, in case you are following along in the archives. And he just said he has an opponent scheduled for Starrcade, but he doesn't name the opponent for reasons unknown. And I actually went ahead and checked the Wikipedia for the show because I completely forgot Terry even wrestled on that show. And as it turns out, they ended up announcing who he was facing later on in the program anyway. Spoiler alert, it was Buddy Landell. Second match on the show was Ole and Arn Anderson versus the team of Keith Freeze and Jim Blackland. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe Blackland here was the man later known as Jimmy Del Rey of Smoky Mountain fame with good old Dr. Tom Pritchard. The National Heavyweight Tag Team titles, those were a real interesting collection of belts. If I'm not mistaken, I think as early as the beginning of '86, the belts just sort of dissipated with no mention once Ole kind of fell out of the picture for a while. And actually, if I'm right, didn't they end up replacing those belts with the U.S. tag titles by mid-'86? I am actually curious with the backstory on that because I've never really heard that topic discussed at any length. And as far as I know, I've never read anything about it in any of the books in the territories. Like why the national heavyweight tag titles were just sort of phased out entirely. It was weird. So anyway, after this quick squash, which Ole and Arn won, in case you couldn't already guess, not that Keith Freeze and Jimmy Del Rey would not have been credible opponents for the Anderson brothers at the time, but not tonight. And by the way, one thing I actually kind of miss in pro wrestling, pretty subtle thing, but it's always very enjoyable to watch. Jobbers getting tagged in and then immediately getting their asses kicked and pinned. Something that always brings a smile to my face, and I have no idea why. Anyway, so after this we had Tully Blanchard recapping the whole molestation angle with Magnum TA and Baby Doll, which I believe they showed last week. It was the one with David Crockett interviewing Magnum, and Baby Doll gets in his face, and in order to teach her respect, Magnum grabs a hold of her wrist and forces his tongue into her mouth on a live camera, with Crockett laughing in the background and cheering him on. The things that used to be socially acceptable on camera back then that would never pass in today's climate. Poor old Magnum would have been #MeToo'd instantly in 2021. So, after that, Tully ran down the I Quit Cage match with Magnum for the Starrcade pay-per-view, which I have vague memories of as a match, but definitely looking forward to going back and watching that in full. Up next, we had this six-man with the Kolovs and Crusher Khrushchev against Jimmy Langston, Kent Glover, and Larry Clark, of which the only jobber I recognized out of the bunch was Glover. Another extended squash match with another common trope I miss being featured in pro wrestling. Heels throwing jobbers over to tag in their jobber partners for the mercy killing. And, of course, before Nikita goes in for the kill with his sickle clothesline, he lets one of the geeks get in a few clean shots before putting him away. And I'll tell you one thing, even though I was, God, probably pre-K watching this stuff at the time, if there was something that I never would have been able to guess looking back at this show in hindsight, it is the fact that about a year down the road from now, they would be setting up Ric Flair to defend his world title against Nikita Koloff at Starrcade. Just something that would have seemed totally out of left field, and honestly, it's going to be very interesting going back and watching this entire plot play out from now until December of '86, because I totally forgot how they went about setting up this title program. We had the Rock and Roll Express taking on Mac and Jim Jeffers. Poor Jim Jeffers just got pounded and pounded in there forever. I don't think Mac actually got tagged in until the very end, at which point Morton and Gibson double team him and immediately put him away with the drop kick for the instant pin. Oh, and by the way, for those of you wondering about how tag team matches should be effectively officiated and regulated, watch how the referee enforces the rules of the tag match here. Just so you remember next time you're watching AEW and you've got 4 guys in the ring doing 3 straight minutes of moves with the ref just standing around letting it all happen. Just saying. We had what I believe was the most, if not all, of the card announcement for Starrcade. And I probably missed a couple things here, but from what I gathered, the card that Jim Crockett announced as follows. We have Crusher Khrushchev facing Sam Houston for the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight title. We got Terry Taylor versus Buddy Landell for the National Heavyweight title, of which they show Buddy executing what I presume was supposed to be an elbow drop on a job guy at a live show, and either horribly botched it or just deciding mid-air, fuck it, I'm just going to do a backsplash. We got the Midnight Express taking on Jimmy Valiant and Miss Atlanta Lively in an Atlanta street fight with Big Mama and Jim Cornette in designated corners. We have Billy Graham and Barbarian in an arm wrestling bout with a $10,000 stake. And I may be missing something else in there. I think I remember hearing something about Manny Fernandez wrestling a match with his sombrero at stake, but could be wrong about that. And of course, this is all mostly the prelim stuff before they announced the featured content later on. Speaking of Graham and Barbarian, I believe this was the point in the show where they aired the Billy Graham shouting contest with Paul Jones on Worldwide Wrestling. And of course, they show the full clip here with the heels coming down to get the better of Graham, and Barbarian ends up busting him open with a cast across the forehead. And there was more to come with this later on, because if you thought this content couldn't get better, just wait for that Paul Jones promo. They aired some footage of Dusty's big return to the Omni, where he had a quick squash and then ended up jumping in for a 6-man later in the night when Manny Fernandez took a spill over the top rope and had to be carried out by a bunch of faces. And of course, the big payoff here was that Jim Crockett announced that Dusty's good to go. The doctors have fully cleared him for Starrcade, and he will be facing Ric Flair for the World Heavyweight title. God, man, I know I talked about this with my World Class review last week, but pro wrestling fans used to be outrageously lively on these shows. Like, you see the top baby faces pin the heels clean in some of these main events for the live events. If you didn't know any better, you think they just won the world title in the main event of WrestleMania after like a 10-year journey of climbing the top of the mountain. And nowadays you get popcorn farts at house shows and live events. If most companies are even doing them right now, I don't even know. We have Billy Jack Haynes wrestling Thunderfoot in a Championship Challenge Series match. And trying to think of the words to best describe how I felt about this. Actually, I think the graphic they showed of JJ right before they cut the commercial was pretty apropos of how I felt about watching this. Just kind of leaning on the total verge of nodding off in complete sheer boredom. And the thing that sucks is, like, if I went back and watched it again, I'd probably have a different opinion, especially after seeing what led up to the finish. But it's like the match just kept going and going and going forever. And of course, he had JJ running interference at various points by grabbing Thunderfoot's ankle when he had Haynes in a front face hold on the mat. Manny Fernandez ended up coming out to sort of provide color commentary, although I can't really say he added much of any value. Anyway, there was a lot that happened at the finish here, so I'll just try to recap that real briefly. So eventually Manny gets fed up with all of JJ's BS, so he runs down and gets involved while Thunderfoot is loading up the gimmick boot behind the ref's back. And eventually he turns around and Haynes ends up grabbing a hold of him and he schoolboys Thunderfoot to steal the win with the added comedy of JJ tripping on the ropes like a goofball trying to get into the ring last minute. And the finish did make up for the previous 2/3 of the match, but yeah, just not a whole lot to report on that one. And again, like I mentioned it briefly last week, but we don't really see too much of Billy Jack Haynes around after this. He came in for a cup of coffee, and by January of '86, he was pretty much phased out of the equation entirely. Don't piss off management, people. Doesn't make for a particularly conducive working environment. So then we get easily the best part of the program this week with the Dusty Rhodes return promo. And I actually went back in the archives real quick because we didn't get too far into this promo before Dusty started breaking out some of the old catchphrases from the famous Hard Times promo that he cut on Mid-Atlantic TV, I believe it was. And it turns out that that promo he did was done a week prior. So there's your little history lesson on Hard Times, baby, if you will. But Nature Boy Ric Flair doesn't know hard times. Because hard times is the textile workers not being able to put food on the table when they got 5 kids, daddy. Hard times is when you put 30 years of your life in a business and they give you a watch and they say, go home, bud, a computer took your spot. That's hard times, daddy. And I know I totally fucking butchered that verbiage, but try and cut me some slack. I didn't go to promo school. But the important thing to remember here is Ric Flair just entered risky business. And when it is all said and done, Dusty is going to be the one that takes the thing that means the most to Flair. That's the World Heavyweight Championship, daddy. God, it is amazing to me that Cody Rhodes, the son of this man, Dusty Rhodes, the son of the American Dream, that guy is currently the top heel in professional wrestling today. Unbelievable. Again, man, the wacky world of pro wrestling. Then we had Ron Garvin versus Paul Garner. Had a nice company warning PR plug from Crockett here, reminding the people to not try any of the moves they see in the ring at home. In the year 1985, mind you. Yeah, that clearly didn't age well. And aside from the don't try this at home message, I wrote down virtually nothing about this. Garvin won with a straight punch. Oh, no, actually, that's a lie. I did write something down about this match. There was one single chant during the course of this match, and it was at the point where Garvin had Garner pinned on the mat, working over the shoulder and neck, and the fans were chanting in unison, "Break it." What fucking assholes these people were. We had this epic Jimmy Valiant Big Mama interview with David Crockett, and for those of you that still can't stand Crockett in the NWA, watch him try to conduct this interview with Valiant here. He was so fantastic trying to restrain his laughter throughout this whole thing. Just displaying an expression like, I have no idea what is happening right now, but goddamn, I am going to hold this mic up and just wait until Valiant stops ranting. And he introduced Big Mama and Miss Atlanta Lively in this interview, at which point the women kissed Valiant on the cheek. And not to spoil anything further, but I use air quotes around women loosely for a reason. Barbarian had a quick squash against a man whose name I did not even bother writing down. I believe Tony Schiavone may have referred to him as Gerald Finley. I presume no relation to Fit Finley. And the best way I could describe this match, much like I could describe every Barbarian match I've ever seen from now until the end of time, he manhandled this poor bugger from bell to bell and had about the safest looking brutal beatdown squash you would expect. Whether it was watching Barbarian throw dudes around in the year 1985 or the year 1997, it never mattered. The bell rings, Barbarian was going to pick you up and throw you around for a while, and whether or not you wanted to go up for this man, he was going to make sure you complied. And if you don't believe me, go watch his tag matches with Ming against the Steiners and Public Enemy on Nitro a decade from now. I think they even may have had a match with the Nasty Boys at one point, and whoo, not a pretty sight. So like I said, Barbarian smashed this fella for a while, and then he pinned him with his hand precariously close to Finley's crotch. I'm sorry, I have to keep in tradition here with how they commonly refer to him on the show as. He was not the Barbarian, he was the Bar-bearing, or the Ball-bearing. So, we had Tully work a match. Before that, we had the Anderson brothers back out for a promo. And the only thing I wrote down here is that Ole promises to put Dusty out of commission for good. And Arn just talks about how great Tully is. And if you think I'm downgrading it, keep in mind that the promo was still cut by Ole and Arn Anderson. So even a mediocre minute and a half promo seemed like a fucking 5-star classic compared to what we hear in the business today. But we did get Tully Blanchard taking on Joe Malcolm, which, again, was just Tully killing a geek in short order. I did like Arn's transition, though, where he just goes, Tully, teach that man a lesson. And teach him a lesson he did. And I still can't get over how much I love that rope-assisted vertical suplex Tully used to do. Tack that on my list of favorite finishers right next to the F5 and the Tombstone Piledriver. And to be clear, I'm speaking on behalf of the Undertaker's version of the Tombstone, not the Beta Bucks version where Matt holds the guy upside down in a 69 position for a fucking eternity and Nick takes 10 months to get himself balanced on the top rope so they can do the spike version of the Piledriver. Oh, and just to throw a bone to all you internet smarts out there, I used to absolutely love that Red Arrow corkscrew splash that Pac used to do in NXT back in the day. I think I've seen him actually break it out in AEW a few times too. And every time I see it, it leaves me absolutely bewildered as to how he pulls it off. And it's also nice that they haven't completely killed that finish like they did the Canadian Destroyer. Otherwise, I might put that on my list here too. So then we had the second best promo segment on the show, courtesy of the Weasel himself and his BPD off-the-cuff ranting. And I honestly don't have a proper way to summarize this. His promo was something to the extent of, Billy Graham's a coward. He attacks me in the ring! But luckily the Barbarian was there to save me. Hurt his hand, he did. But he knew what needed to be done. And that's what happens when you put your hands on me! And of course, Barbarian comes off the ropes and puts him down. Now, did you think it was worth it, Superstar? I didn't think so. But then what does Jim Crockett do? That no good slime ball Jim Crockett has to outdo himself again. He put $10,000 at stake on an arm wrestling contest with Superstar Billy Graham and the Barbarian. You know what Superstar's capable of. Arr! To which Tony capped off by saying something to the effect of, man, Paul Jones is pretty enraged there for a minute. You don't say, Tony. Never would have Figure that out based on the 85 decibel levels that Paul managed to sing through during that rambling. It's fucking classic. Now, of course, I cannot do Paul Jones justice, but God, the more I'm watching of him, the more I'm starting to realize I might be wrong about my perception of him as a child. And to be fair, we are yet to approach the Paul Jones Army saga, so maybe I'm evaluating this situation too soon, but so far, Paul Jones has been a total highlight on this program, and I definitely advocate for more promo time for him. And in the main event of the night, it was Terry Taylor taking on Osmosis Moses, or Almost Moses. Isn't Almost AJ's partner on Raw right now? I don't know. Yeah, suffice it to say, I kind of butcher the jobbers' names on this program pretty bad. Not that it really matters all that much. Anyway, they spent most of the match, plugging some anniversaries and special celebrations for viewers, and Terry won with a superplex. Another once great professional wrestling move that they totally killed as a finish. And to close out the show, we had a promo from the Rock and Roll Express, or more accurately, I should say, Ricky Morton cut the promo while Robert Gibson sort of uttered words that may or may not have been part of the English language.
I know some of these words.
And I guess I never analyzed this so much as a kid, but God, going back and listening to rock and roll promos, I think I have found a newfound respect for Ricky Morton's ability to carry the bulk of the dialogue because, as far as I can recollect, I never recall a single promo from Gibson at any point in his career where he added anything of value to rock and roll promos. Not hating on the guy, of course. I love me some Rock and Roll Express, but promos for Robert Gibson, whew, not his strong suit. And I don't think he ever got any better. Anyway, that was the show. And they're like, 3 weeks out from the Starrcade event? And they pretty much announced the whole card in its entirety, right? And it really goes to show where the priorities used to be in wrestling and just how drastically things have shifted over the course of the last 15 or 20 plus years. And again, man, a lot of material packed into the show, but everything just flows so smoothly from start to finish. And as I mentioned last week, yes, of course the matches are usually never anything to write home about, but you know what the matches are? Effective. Because they knew what the matches needed to accomplish. They were all utilized to enhance the guys that were getting the pushes, and they made sure those guys got put over in the end. They didn't let their jobbers go 50-50 with the stars. They didn't give the job guys 20 visual pins and false finishes over top guys. They didn't drag out matches to these 20-minute spot fest showcases. They got in, put over the guys that needed to get put over, and moved on to the promos, pre-tapes, and pay-per-view card hype. Almost sounds stupid fucking simple. It makes you wonder how wrestling gravitated so far from it in such a short time span. Anyhow, I'll close things out here by talking about World Class Championship Wrestling from November 13th, 1982. And we are back down in Dallas at the Sportatorium for this show. I want to touch on this again because I alluded to this a little bit during the AEW report, but I think to sort of paint the picture as to what I'm talking about with the whole need to change up the formula every now and then. Something I really miss about professional wrestling is having the announcers start the show with a cold recap. They don't immediately dive into ring action from the jump. They don't do some big brawl angle or crash TV skit at downtime. They open the show, they cut to the announcers, they recap the big hot button stories, they take a minute to talk about the rundown, or they talk about and run down the card for the night, and they give each match a proper talking point instead of glossing over it with graphics. It's not rocket science, but boy does it make it so much easier to follow the content understand how things are carrying over from show to show. But like, their whole spiel here at the beginning where Bill Mercer and Jay Saldy are talking about the big return match for Kerry Von Erich later in the night. And they also talk about how Fritz Von Erich, he's stumbled upon a major bombshell to drop regarding a bounty that was put out on Kerry to take him out in order for Ric Flair to avoid having to defend the NWA World Heavyweight title against him. And that'll be something that we cover later on in the show. They're milking things. They're building to things. They're telling you what you can expect. Just elements of pro wrestling that I wish people would pay more attention to. Our first match of the night is the Freebirds taking on Killer Tim Brooks and Frank Dusek with two officials. And speaking of AEW, there's that's something they could probably use during their tag matches. More than one referee. In fact, they could probably use the entire Navy SEAL crew to enforce the rules of their tag matches. And they probably still wouldn't be able to keep it clean. Pretty long tag match, but they managed to pack a lot in here to make it worthwhile. One thing too, I just thought about this. It really struck me watching this tag match, and I also think it's a lost art form in wrestling today. The idea of actually milking a real, authentic hot tag. I think it's I think it's problematic for a lot of guys in the business today. They understand like the nuts and bolts of tag psychology, but they don't really know how to apply it effectively. Like so many tag matches now, they have these forced hot tags that really don't feel like hot tags. Like A, because no one pops for them, and B, like if the babyface does run wild with an offensive flurry, he either gets immediately cut off too soon or it evidently leads into something that doesn't build to the finish. Like it's just a spot that happens. I don't know. I wish people putting together matches in the business today would pay more attention to this formula. Because like a lot of this match was carried by the faces working over the heels. And there was like a momentary brief period where the heels would cut off Hayes and they would work him over before Gordy got the hot tag at the end. But like as soon as Hayes got the tag and Gordy was the one that was the House of Fire, everything was just bam, 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 bam with Gordy running wild. He eventually got Frank up on his shoulders for the fireman's carry. Hayes hit the double axe off the top rope, and they got the 3. They didn't have Gordy get a big tag at the end, only to get cut off by the heels 20 seconds later. They didn't kill the crowd in the lead up to the finish. They let the heels get their brief heat, and as soon as Gordy got he got the tag for the faces, they took it home immediately. Just, another thing I noticed when I'm comparing modern wrestling to how things used to be done, and honestly how things used to be more effective. But good opening tag match. Up next we had the Great Kabuki in another 2-on-1 handicap squash, this time sporting the Scott Steiner chainmail instead of the Devil Dragon mask from last week. It's unfortunate. I kind of like the Dragon mask. Anyway, this was sort of the same rules from last week. No tags, tornado-style rules, and actually that made for a more entertaining showcase, especially with watching the Samoan and whoever the other guy was, Salvador or something. Like, those guys are just tripping over one another and constantly getting in each other's way. And, well, it wasn't pretty, I'll say that much. And, of course, at this point they're running with the story of Kabuki using the elbow drop to the leg as his signature move, which, again, very odd that this was viewed as a submission move back in the day. But Kabuki eliminates Salvador with the move, and it boils down to him and the Samoan. And Samoan got in a very momentary flurry of offense, at which point Samoan missed a diving headbutt, completely fucked up a second rope dive by losing his balance and just slipping through the ropes, and then getting his ass dropped with a super kick, and then getting his leg stomped for the ref stoppage. And to say this was a sheer and total train wreck would probably be the highest praise I can give it, but the idea was to put over Kabuki, so at least it had that going for it. But post-match, King Kong Bundy made his way out to stop a post-match assault from Kabuki and Gary Hart. And they kind of go back and forth with Hart getting in between Bundy and Kabuki as they're trying to go at one another with a chair and nunchucks. And then eventually Bundy takes off, and well, there was more to this later on too. Featured match for the show was Kerry Von Erich taking on Destroyer 2. Sully did a brief interview with Kerry before the match, which basically just saying his end goal was to get to Flair in the NWA World title, but he knows that Kabuki was the guy that Flair paid off to take out Kerry, and he was going to get to him when the time came. And the match was just a showcase piece for Kerry. He ended up winning with the roundhouse. We had Bugsy McGraw taking on Checkmate in a relatively long TV match. And this one had some layered stories. Checkmate was sporting the tiger mask here, supposedly for something involving him being stripped of a championship or something. And I guess he wore the mask to bear semblance that he was still a rightful champion. Or something. Couldn't really follow along there. And if you watch last week's show with Bugsy, they played up some similar story elements here with the entire match being built around Checkmate going into a possum position on the mat while Bugsy kept struggling to wrestle him down. And they ended up doing this several times throughout the match, with Bugsy getting more and more frustrated as it went along. And it actually played into the finish, which I'll cover in a second. And obviously, for anyone that doesn't know, Bugsy was a total whack job gimmick on World Class, and he was definitely known for his more ranty, off-the-wall promos, but again, man, can't deny the fact that he was a big star in the 80s. Anyway, so Bugsy started making a comeback at the end, and right as he went to try and grab a hold of Checkmate, he ended up cowering to the ring apron, and Bugsy went out after him for the more cat and mouse chase idea. And while they're both out on the apron fighting, the ref ends up counting them out, I think is what Mercer said. I thought they got disqualified for the ref losing control of the match or whatever, but apparently it was a double count-out finish. And of course, Bugsy ends up brawling with Checkmate after the bell until they separate both guys. Generally, the match sucked and, probably went way too long, especially with all the charades they were playing here, but people ate it up, man. They loved them some Bugsy McGraw. And shit finish or no shit finish never mattered, because they were going to cheer that man no matter what. It's amazing to see how the scope of the wrestling landscape has changed over the years, especially once people started getting too smart for the business and, naturally learning to hate shit finishes and non-finishes in wrestling. It sucks because, in certain cases where no contest finishes would actually fit and work, fans would still poo-poo it because they didn't get a decisive winner. Anyway, so we come to the big highlight of the show here, and that is all centered around the big Fritz Von Erich revelation regarding Kerry Von Erich and the Bounty. So just to recap real quick, here's what we've established going in. We know that a bounty was put out on behalf of Ric Flair to take out Kerry Von Erich. And we know that the man paid off to take out Kerry was the Great Kabuki. But here's what we don't know prior to this announcement. We don't know who the bounty was paid out to. And we don't know how Fritz obtained word or documentation as to whom this bounty was paid out to. So we cut to World Class Studios, and we have Fritz and Gary Hart standing in the frame. And of course, Hart's maintaining social distance from Fritz, just wanting nothing to do with this man like the scummy coward he is. And I will not be able to do this justice, but if you know what Fritz sounds like, just imagine this super masculine, intimidating, deep bass voice presenting clear-cut evidence on a screen that he was handed a Xerox copy of a check signed by Ric Flair, with a K, made out to Gary Hart for a grand total of $12,500. And this evidence was presented to him by none other than King Kong Bundy, former affiliate of Gary Hart. And he says that this is proof that Gary Hart worked in cahoots with Flair to have the Great Kabuki try and take Kerry out in exchange for this $12,500 price. And he mightn't have gotten away with it too if it weren't for the... never mind, I've already made that joke once before. So, of course, Gary Hart just sort of fades into the background, realizing that his goose is cooked. And we get the announcement here that because of this newfound revelation, the NWA has decided to sanction a future world title match between Flair and Kerry at a date TBA. They don't know when, they don't know where, but by God, when Kerry gets his hands on Ric Flair, he's going to mangle that poor SOB. So yeah, that segment was pretty fucking great. You know, and again, just imagine that being delivered from a guy like Fritz Von Erich, who can make your knees buckle and your liver quiver with that super groggy, deep-cut tone. I mean, I was petrified for Gary Hart here, and this segment took place almost 40 fucking years ago. Yeah, great stuff, man. And imagine that. A layered story with multiple branching paths that all come together and make perfect sense. And they actually bother to explain to the audience in a clear, effective manner how this came to be. Wow. Not rocket surgery. And they capped off the show perfectly here with having Mercer and Saldi have Bundy sit down at the booth and asked him if he would come to the show next week to explain why he presented Fritz with the information that he did. Why did he sell out to Gary Hart? So now we have another wrinkle to look forward to for next week's show. Some really great plot development. Yeah, 2 of the 3 matches pretty much sucked cock. We had 4 matches on this show, right? Yeah, it was 4 matches. My bad. Yeah, 2 of the matches were not good. But, I mean, what are you really comparing that to in 1982? Like, by those standards, it was probably on par with something you'd see on an average episode of Rampage today. And again, 45 minutes of wrestling can really give you a whole different appreciation when the show's over because, like, even if the show's not all that good, it's only 45 minutes. You know, but they still gave me a whole hell of a lot to look forward to next week with this Kerry Von Erich, Ric Flair story, and now how Bundy fits into the equation. Anyhow, I think I've rambled on long enough for this show. One thing that is becoming evidently clear with these retro reviews is that these shows are going to be a little longer than I anticipated going in, but hey, it is what it is. People like lengthy podcasts, so at least if I'm providing content, it'll feel worth it in the end. Guys, if you want to keep posted with FSWR content in the future, make sure you smash that subscribe button, like the show, and leave a comment down below on any or all the material discussed on today's program. We will be back on Monday to probably give a very brief rundown of the highlights and lowlights of Rampage. I will do an in-depth review and recap of the AEW Full Gear show. And, of course, we also have the second part of the NWA By Any Means Necessary show to talk about, which should be a lot of fun. Until then, take care all. Peace.